You're watching JCT TV. This is Bible study for the 21st century. So welcome friends, Jim Cantelon here. Always fun and a great privilege and honor for me to take a few minutes of your time as we explore the life of Jesus. We've been at this now, Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts, and John, for over 7 years. Hard to believe. And just recently we finished the Gospel of John. And as I promised, as soon as that happened, we'll go back and start all over again with Matthew chapter 1. That's what we're doing. Now we're in Matthew 5, Sermon on the Mount, good stuff. More after this.
With your help, while working for orphans and widows, want to give a bicycle to our volunteers in Africa. Volunteers walk hours along winding, dusty roads to visit people who are sick and dying. They bathe and clean them, bring them medicines and food, and lots of care and support. Would you like to wrap a bicycle this Christmas? What a difference a bicycle would make. Instead of 6 hours to get there, they can get there in 2. This Christmas, we're asking you to wrap up a bicycle. Here's how. Donate through our website, by phone or by check.
So friends, we are in the Sermon on the Mount, and I don't want to keep repeating myself, but just for those of you watching for the first time, this is the greatest sermon ever preached by Jesus on the Mount, as it's called, up against the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. It's a foothill, more than a mountain, but when you're up there, you're looking down over the Sea of Galilee, and it's a beautiful view. You see Tiberias over on the right, you see the Golan Heights on the left, you see the southern end of the lake, far, far away, about 12 kilometers or so. Knowing that's the Jordan River that's going down through the Jordan Valley all the way down to the Dead Sea. It's a beautiful, beautiful prospect. And it's where Jesus gathered his disciples together after a heavy time with a whole bunch of hundreds of people down in Capernaum, which is right down on the shore of the northern coast of the Sea of Galilee. And he preaches this sermon, starting with what's called the Beatitudes, the blessings, and then he launches into further implications of what it means to be someone on their way, if you will, to the kingdom of heaven. And he's drawing contrasts between the new and the old, not at the expense of the old, but to honor the old by saying the new has grown out of the old, just like branches and new leaves grow out of old root systems. So too, what I'm teaching, Jesus is saying, springs out of the old root system of the law and the prophets. It's a beautiful sermon and has huge impact and long-term ramifications. So that's where we are. Let's pick it up in, let's start with verse 21 of Matthew 5. You've heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who's angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. Anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar and there remember your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them. Then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who's taking you to court. Do it while you're still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you'll not get out until you've paid the last penny. Okay. First of all, the new and the old. We looked last time at how Jesus had put Pharisaic righteousness into perspective. He now proceeds to describe the new wine, if you will, proceeding from the Old Testament law and the oral law. He's going to demonstrate, the reality of the new leaves that have sprung out of the root system. The new wine that is springing out of the old vine. And I made the point last program that old vines produce new wine. New vines do not produce new wine. In fact, if you missed last week's program, you can find it, on YouTube, Jim Cantelon Today YouTube, or you can go to Roku, or you can go on to jimcantelontoday.com. There's various ways of catching up with us, and I hope you'll do that. So, the first thing he's going to address is murder and anger. And we've read it already here. And you'll notice as you read verse 21, where is it here? Okay. You've heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. Each paragraph that he's referring to in this point of the sermon, it starts out with, you have heard that it was said. You have heard that it was said. Now, this, of course, is how the predominantly illiterate and unlearned had been taught the law. Both the Old Testament law and the scribal, or the oral law, were read and or spoken to the people. And their knowledge was based on hearing. You have heard that it was said. It was based on hearing. And the hope, from the rabbis was that the people would memorize what they were hearing. Well, Jesus is going to give them an earful for their hearing about what lies behind what they've heard. Pretty profound stuff. Of course you should not murder, says Jesus. That's a no-brainer. But that horrific outcome is rooted in something that precedes it. In almost every case. Anger. Anger. You're angry for some reason. You have suffered an injustice, perhaps, or as you see it, or you've been marginalized or vilified or told lies about, slandered, or someone has stolen something from you. You read, this is especially true in many cases in domestic violence situations, but you read about these crimes of passion, if you will, almost all the time on the internet these days, in newspapers. Anger is at the root of so much killing in our world. And both epithets here, raka, you fool, expose a low view of neighbor. In modern parlance, it is utter disdain that spews empty head, blockhead, numbskull, you stupid, fool, outcast, scoundrel, foreigner, These accusations are bathed in contempt and justify the murder in the view of the murderer. You deserve to die. That's basically the attitude of the murderer. This low life of yours is expendable. Our world is better without you. And so the knife is raised, or the gun is, the trigger is pulled. And indeed, the thrust of the weapon requires the impetus that anger provides. Okay? So, the disciples and then those in the periphery are hearing these words, and they pause, I'm sure, just like we do when we read them. We're all guilty of anger. Yikes. It may not have overcome us yet, but the potential is there to lash out at someone vis-a-vis, you get cut off in traffic, road rage. Where'd that come from? It comes and it goes, hopefully, in a moment, but we know of horrific accidents and sometimes killings that have occurred from a moment of road rage. So what Jesus is doing here is he's calling for preemptive action. Israel's means of atonement means at one-ment, reconciliation, was blood sacrifice. As the penitent brought his lamb to the altar, he would press his hands down on the head of the lamb, conferring his guilt onto this helpless animal. And he would make a statement of confession, something like, I confess my wrongdoing, let this act be for my covering. Okay? I've sinned. I pass it now to this lamb. And then the animal was slain, the blood poured out on the altar, and the priest declared absolution for the sin that had been committed. That's how it worked in those days. Well, Jesus says, before you're reconciled to God, you must be reconciled to your brother or to your sister. Okay, this love of neighbor and God and neighbor is a constant theme in Old Testament prophecy and also in the ministry of Jesus. The anger must be dealt with, and you deal with it by confessing to the object of your anger and then confessing it to God. Which sounds easy. It's not easy, especially if you'd rather wring their neck. But to confess that you're angry with them and the reasons why takes a definite measure of self-discipline and adult thinking rather than juvenile thinking. Then you're in territory, if you will, where you're able to forgive your neighbor. And perhaps in that conversation, your neighbor might say, oh, no, I was wrong too. Will you forgive me? That's often what happens. And this is the beauty and the wonder of atonement and reconciliation. But if the murder is unconfessed, I should say if the anger is unconfessed, and if it's allowed to percolate, in one's soul, the cumulative effect of this unconfessed anger can result in murder. So better to swallow your pride and confess to this person that you're currently hating, the reason for your hatred, the reason for your anger, and confess that it's wrong, and I ask you to forgive me, which will 9 times out of 10 hear them saying, well, no, you need to forgive me too. But the point is, you cannot love God and hate your neighbor at the same time. It's out of sync with heaven's heartbeat. So if you deal with your anger in God's way, you'll avoid not only murder, but also the possibility of a costly lawsuit.
Wow! Working for Orphans and Widows has been caring for orphans and widows in Africa and India for over 20 years. Key to its vision is partnership with local champions who engage hundreds of church-based volunteers in home-based care. Care for the sick and the dying in their own humble homes. They are defenseless and afflicted. They are the least of these that Jesus would have us love and care for. Our partnered champions are based in South Africa, Zambia, Malawi, and India. They provide faithful, accountable, and godly care for thousands. Together with WOW, they truly are the hands and feet of Jesus to the sick and the dying. Founder and president Jim Cantelon has been committed to both teaching the gospel via Jim Cantelon Today TV and practicing the gospel through WOW. WOW is a proven ministry. We are grateful for your support. Call, write, or log on to wowmission.com and be inspired.
So, Jesus just gets into real deep water here, and he does it in only the way Jesus could do it. And I I'm not going to try to embellish what he says. I just want to read what he says and just make a few comments. In verses 27 to 30 of Matthew 5, he says this: "You've heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. Better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell." It has been said, let's stop there. Let's stop there. To be clear, the Old Testament injunction against adultery is about more than sex. Let's just be clear on that one. As hard as it is for our world and our culture to understand or accept this, adultery is more about property than it is about sex. As grating as we may find it, today, the fact is that the Old Testament Israelite culture was totally patriarchal. It was all about the father, all about the man, all about the elder male. The man was king. His wife or his wives, because many of them had more than one wife, his children, his entire household were in their entirety his property. Make no mistake. His dwelling, he could divorce his wife at will. He could even sell his children, just as he might sell an ox. His dwelling compound was his own little fortress. Any break-in by a thief was not just an intrusion, but an assault against his sovereignty. And so any man who seduced, raped, and or flirted with another man's wife was engaging in an act of war against that man. He was a thief, a brigand, a careless wrecker of another man's peace. He was worthy of death by stoning. That was the culture of the day. So, even the look at another man's wife was suspect. Jesus knew this. We know this, even today. Adultery doesn't happen spontaneously. It's a process. The look, the casual contact, the confidential comment, the flattery, the innocent meeting for coffee. Adultery is built incrementally, but it all starts with the look. Now, I've had so many guys say to me, "Jim, Jesus says looking at a woman lustfully is to commit adultery." And I remember former President Jimmy Carter was vilified because in a men's magazine where he was interviewed, he talked about having committed adultery many times with his eyes. Well, he was taking the scripture perhaps without fully appreciating what it is Jesus is getting at here. In the Greek, the look suggests a lusting after. That is, it's a conscious intent to have sex, a deliberate cultivation of the woman. It's not just a case of looking at a woman and feeling desire. It's a case of, I'm going to get her. I'm going to get her to bed. I'm lusting after her. I am going to pursue her. That's what's implicit in the look, a process that will end in bed. But then that end will be but the beginning of the disintegration of that woman's marriage, the upsetting of her husband's peace, the fracturing of a family. So in Jesus' view, adultery was a relational tumor, a cancer that would quickly metastasize, destroying lives forever. So to emphasize the point, Jesus uses both euphemism and hyperbole. These are literary devices. These are teaching devices. the offending eye, the mechanism by which we're able to look, should be plucked out, and the right hand, and it's interesting, many Bible commentators, including one of the church fathers by the name of Origen, you can Google Origen, O-R-I-G-E-N, O-R-I-G-N, Origen and Matthew 19:12. Google that. To him, the right hand meant private parts. Should be cut off. Now, in order to avoid going to hell for the sin of adultery. Let's be clear, Jesus doesn't want to have a bunch of dismembered disciples following him about. But he exaggerated for the sake of emphasis, and that's what hyperbole is. Abuse someone else's marriage at your and their peril. Committing adultery has a huge price. Now, we live in a highly sexualized culture. And these days, it's everywhere. In fact, it's looked upon, as a kind of a human right. And I'm not discounting or speaking poorly of sex at all. But the fact is that we live in a world of disposable relationships. And next time, I'm going to talk about divorce, and it's a huge topic, divorce and remarriage. But it seems in our world these days that anybody can hook up, which is the euphemistic term, with anybody at any time, for any reason, even if there's just an instant glimmer of desire. And sex has become recreational. It's become, an adventure, something to do tonight. What are you doing, guys? We live with the destruction that it produces. Not only often, unfortunately, in the woman's life, especially if there's a pregnancy that occurs, leading up to the whole topic of birth control and abortion, to abort, not to abort. One of the dividing issues, certainly of North American culture to this very day, it leads to all kinds of relational complications in terms of the couple's closest friends and relatives, loved ones, good friends. There's such a domino effect, and we pretend that sex is it's only sex. I remember during a few years ago, as you recall, without mentioning names, there was a big scandal in the White House, and I remember a number of pundits on various talk shows saying it's only sex. I mean, come on. No, it's not only sex. First of all, procreation is all about sex. Every time we have sex, we have the potential of creating a new life, a whole new universe, just from one moment's, maybe 2 or 3 minutes in bed. A whole new life. I mean, is that serious or what? But the ramifications go not only to that potential new life, but also to her life, his life, her father, her mother, his father, his mother, her siblings, her friends, his workmates, her workmates. It's like throwing a pebble, into a placid pond, and the ripples just seem to carry on forever. So, to lust after someone, and in this patriarchal culture, Jesus is talking to men here, but I mean, he could just easily be talking to women, because women can lust after too. To pursue someone with the intent of having sex with them, without regard for the consequences, without regard for even the spiritual dimension, is to make a very, very bad decision. And if you're considering it as an elder here, I'm probably older than you are, don't. Step back. Don't sell your birthright for a mess of pottage, as the Old Testament puts it. Your life and their life is worth so much more than a momentary, passionate encounter. I'll be back right after this.
For over 20 years, WOW, working for orphans and widows, has been caring for vulnerable and at-risk women and children hard hit by the HIV and AIDS pandemic in Africa and India. WOW engages with local partner champions and church-based volunteers in the care of the desperately needy. Now, in recent months, we have expanded our reach to Ukraine. Over 8 million refugees have fled the ravages of that war-torn country, mostly women and children, including many orphans. Our partner in East Europe tells us of the busing of Ukrainian orphans through the night to safety. Churches have become refugee centers, opening their buildings to become safe havens in the rescue. And WOW has come alongside. We have begun supporting this rescue work, but there is so much more that we must provide to these heroic churches. They need funding to continue for hundreds of orphans yet to come. We may be only small players, but you can partner with us in the rescue of Ukrainian orphans. WOW is a proven ministry. We are grateful for your support. Call, write, or log on to wowmission.com and be inspired.
So friends, it's a fairly heavy session there. Life is heavy, let's face it. One of the heavinesses of life is the injustices around our world, and this is why WOW exists, Working for Orphans and Widows, which you see promoted on JCT. JCT is WOW, and WOW is JCT. We're one and the same. With JCT, we're presenting the gospel. With WOW, we're living the gospel by God's grace. And with great thankfulness to the Lord, almost 25 years now, we've been involved with orphans and widows at great risk from HIV and AIDS, COVID-19, and other opportunistic infections. And in the name of the Lord, through the mobilization of all kinds of churches across sub-Saharan Africa, we're making a big difference. And you can log on to wowmission.com or go to @wowmission on Instagram, find out about our ministry, and boy, if you can support it, that would be terrific. So grateful for your viewership, and God willing, we'll see you next time. Bye for now.